Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com. We've been having a storm of conversation about the merits of Yun-Chan Lim's Rachmaninoff Third Piano Concerto on Decca, which is kind of not fabulous, but not terrible. He's very talented, and I don't want to get into that all over again. What I do want to say, however, is that it occurred to me in the course of that conversation that I hadn't done a repertoire video on the Third Piano Concerto yet, and so now seems like a good time to let you know what the best recordings of the Third Piano Concerto really are, so that there's no doubt, no question. I can give you a completely objective list. So I have selected a dozen fabulous recordings of the Third Piano Concerto, and they're really all wonderful. They're all better than Yun-Chan Lim's, and hopefully he'll get to do a real studio recording. I mean, that was a one-off competition event, and people have told me how thrilled they were and how like their hair was standing on end. And okay, so, it's like shave it off. It's okay. We're moving on. The great recordings of the Rachmaninoff Third. And there is an amazing amount of consensus about what these are, which I think is always very, very interesting. Looking at the comments and looking at the, what you've all said about it. I mean, there are certain names that keep popping up, and they're in this list because they deserve to pop up. They're wonderful, and people who know the work like the back of their hands mention these performances regularly. And who am I to disagree? I'm just a humble servant of the music, as you know. So let's start at the beginning, right? You got to do Rachmaninoff's own recording. You have to. It's let's see, he's playing the piano with Philly. I think it's right, Philly and Ormandy, right? Oh, yes. Yummy, yummy, yummy. With Eugene Ormandy and Philly. It was recorded in 1939 and 1940. And it's typically splendid. Now, Rachmaninoff authorized cuts in the piece, and he usually observed them. And others do, and some don't. And I couldn't care less about any of that crap. What matters is how effective the performance is. If the cuts were authorized, or if it's what he did, or I used to be like really dogmatic about things like that. I have to tell you, it's a youth thing. All of you people out there who think that it matters, wait till you're a little older. It doesn't matter. It's not going to matter at all. You're going to spend the difference between 42 minutes and 40 and a half minutes listening to the work. That other minute and a half, it's not going to make or break the deal. You'll relax as you get a little older. Anyway, Rachmaninoff's own recording is sonically limited, obviously. The pianism is splendid. It's quite wonderful. Rachmaninoff was at the end of his life, actually, when he made this recording, and it's remarkable for how good it still is and how well his technique held up. The reality, for me anyway, is that like a lot of composers who play their own music, there are moments where he seems a bit brusque, a little impatient. I like the flowing tempos. I really do. But he could hold back a bit sometimes, stop and smell the roses a little bit. He's pushing forward more or less the entire way. And it's a work that can really bog down in less authoritative hands. So I don't blame him for that. But there's plenty of room in Rachmaninoff's own interpretation, let's put it that way, for those who are to come and those who will play it differently. And all great music, of course, withstands a variety of interpretations, and the composer's is not definitive, ever. Shouldn't be. And I don't think Rachmaninoff would have believed for a minute that it was. But I'm very happy that he set this down, and it's a standard by which others will be judged, and that's fair. That's perfectly fair. So there's that one. Next, after Rachmaninoff, Vladimir Horowitz with Fritz Reiner. Now, this was recorded in, 1951, I believe. It's in very good sound for its day. It really is. It's with the RCA Victor Symphony Orchestra. And they really do a bang-up job with the work. This concerto, I have to say this, we have to say it now. It is not about the piano purely. It is as much about the orchestra and the interaction between the piano and the orchestra as it is about the piano itself. And you hear that right at the opening. I mean, you have a statement of the main theme and a counterstatement. The statement is given to the piano very simply in octaves, it's as simple as can be. And then it's repeated on the orchestral cellos while the piano goes underground, as it were, and accompanies the orchestra with going, it's like all this very rapid passage work. It's probably not a lot of fun to play. I mean, and that's the entire first subject in the exposition. The piano is submerged for most of it, and finally it pops up at the very, very end. Then there's a transition to the second subject, and the piano comes back and gets a chance to take the spotlight again. But for a good couple of minutes, it's playing, but what it's playing is not as important as what the orchestra is doing. The concerto is full of moments like that. And the pianist has to know when to back down, when to yield to the orchestra, and the conductor has to be able to characterize these orchestral parts. And so you need a real meeting of equal minds about this work. And the best performances have that. And that's frankly what that limb performance lacks. And it's not just a question of technique, of burning through the piano part or which cadenza you pick. That's another thing I couldn't care less about. It's about whether or not the two artists are simpatico, whether they're in sync, and whether that's reflected in the resulting recording. They don't just stick microphones to the piano so that it's this jumbo monstrous thing and you don't hear the orchestra, as is the case with the limb recording. There has to be both. And so with all due respect to those who hear artists live, whoever they are, and go see these things, I am totally not interested in anybody's impression of a live version that may have thrilled them to the innermost fiber of their musical being. Because what matters is how the thing sounds at home when we're all listening to it on our audio systems. That's what matters, not what someone may have done on the day. Any pianist today worth their salt who is playing this piece can have a stunning performance on the day and can leave an audience absolutely rhapsodically transported into ecstasies of enthusiasm. That's meaningless because it's over. It's a one-shot deal. But recordings persist. They are perpetual. So Reiner and Horowitz, oh my gosh, this is thrilling. Not only is it thrilling, I mean, it's amazing in terms of the piano playing and Reiner's accompaniments, but Horowitz redid this with Ormandy in stereo. It was not very good. It was toward the latter stages of his career. He wasn't in such great shape technically. This is the one. And apparently Rachmaninoff was dazzled by this interpretation, not necessarily this record. He was dead by then, but by hearing Horowitz play the work. So yeah, that's the one on RCA. Gotta have it. Now, and the rest of these are in absolutely no particular order until we get to the end, to the however pick, which will, of course, be the greatest recording of all time, because I say it is. Now, we have here Ashkenazi. Now, Ashkenazi recorded this concerto at least 4 times, right? There was this one. This is the first one with the London Symphony and Anatole Fistulari accompanying very well. Then he did a really wonderful recording on RCA, which is also different from this, but equally fine, with Ormandy in Philadelphia. One of his very, very few recordings for a label that wasn't Decca, and it's astoundingly good. And then he did it with Previn, and then he did it again with Haitink, if I'm not mistaken, digitally. The problem with Ashkenazi is that he's competed with himself too much, and not always to his advantage. The early 2 recordings, the Ormandy and this one, are the best. They are fresh, they're exciting, they're beautifully played, they're wonderfully shaped. He's very sensitive to what's going on in the orchestra. He's a very sensitive chamber music player. So we're in good shape. Ashkenazi is definitely one of the best if you get the right one. But those latter 2, less so. They're just lesser. Here was a very curious and interesting one that came out rather recently. Mikhail Pletnev with Rostropovich. It was coupled with Prokofiev's third concerto. A really interesting pairing. This was recorded in 2003, it looks like, on Deutsche Grammophon. A very interesting interpretation. It was fascinating to put these 2 artists together because Rostropovich is, of course, a romantic, panting, heaving, and sweating kind of guy. And Pletnev is a cool, calculating kind of, but at the same time, sometimes perversely mercurial pianist. You're not quite sure what you're going to get. And what we got here was a very interesting meeting of minds on the Rachmaninoff Third. The opening is rather reticent. The whole first movement seems a little maybe underplayed and subdued, which only gives the work more, the opportunity to give the work more interest as it proceeds, which is what happens in this performance. And it's very, very interesting for that reason. That first movement is very symphonic. Aside from the cadenza, whichever one you pick, there's not a lot of banging and screaming from the piano. There really isn't. And it's a very carefully structured movement. It ends quietly. I think that this performance is very cognizant of, the expressive ambience of the music, and it gets more exciting as it goes, which is really the opposite of what happens with most performances, which is they tear into the first movement and sometimes the finale, but the slow movement just dies, and and even the finale tends to drag. It really does. In many performances, because it's a very long movement, and unless you cut little snips here and there, which is not a bad idea, I might add, it can bog down. So this is a very, very interesting performance. Thoughtful and intelligent and different. And, that's what you look for. You want to know the range of possibilities in the work. Oh, yes. Classic. Abby Simon, St. Louis Symphony, Leonard Slatkin. A wonderful Rachmaninoff concerto cycle. Abby Simon is probably the most underrated great pianist in the entire 20th century. His Ravel cycle is fabulous. This is fabulous. His Chopin was marvelous. He was a really wonderful pianist for connoisseurs. Everything he did was musical and smart, and his collaborations with Slatkin and St. Louis were wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. And so this is a fine cycle. And the third is terrific. It really is. It's, again, an underrated performance, one that people don't pay attention to. And it's not one that's going to, grab you with the flash and dazzle type thing. But his technique is very secure. And, Slatkin's a marvelous partner. And they work together to really realize the symphonic stature of the piece. So it's a beautiful performance. It's on Vox. Then for recent Rachmaninoff cycles. Oh, this is fantastic. Stephen Hough with the Dallas Symphony and Andrew Litton on Hyperion. Now, I remember when this came out, it was issued back in the day. They were doing SACD or surround things, and also regular digital stereo. And the surround thing sounded just terrible, absolutely terrible. But the regular stereo sounds just marvelous. So that was really a good thing. And these performances have that kind of fluidity that Rachmaninoff's own performance had. Hough is such a sensitive artist. He really is. But at the same time, they are willing to relax into the music just that much more, and give it some breathing room, which it needs. And it's just really, the Dallas Symphony sounds fantastic. It's a wonderful, wonderful set. Litton made some fantastic recordings on Hyperion. The Ives Symphony cycle is also first class. And so, you could really trust this cycle. It has no weak links, actually, but we talked about it before when we did, Rachmaninoff piano concerto cycles. Those videos were done. But for this work particularly, it's an excellent performance of the third concerto. It has no dead spots or weak moments. It goes with the inevitability of fate itself. It's wonderful. So that's that one. Then let's see. Oh yeah, this one's a little unusual. Jed and I talked about this one recently, actually, because we were discussing the work and some of the better performances of it. And Edel Barrett with the Polish National Radio Symphony Orchestra and Antoni Witt on Naxos. Very surprisingly fine and very different. Witt is a wonderful, wonderful conductor, a wonderful accompanist, and he finds all kinds of detail in the orchestra that others don't. And Barrett is not someone who takes this music for granted. She's a thoughtful pianist. She's recorded way too much stuff, and some is good and some is not as good. But here, she did all the Rachmaninoff piano music for Naxos. She knows her Rachmaninoff, and she knows what interests her. And some of the things that interest her, especially in the slow movement and in parts of the finale, are not necessarily things that interest everybody else. So it's a lot of fun to listen to. It's a different interpretation, somewhat measured, but full of character and personality. And actually, if you really know the work well, you're going to hear things here that you don't hear anywhere else in a good way. You don't want to just hear something bizarre for its own sake, but as part of the overall conception, it's a real working partnership between the two, between Witt and Biret, and it's worth your time. So there's that one. Then, well, oh, of course, we have to talk about Martha Argerich, don't we? This is live. It's live with Ricardo Chailly and the Symphony Orchestra of Bavaria. Right now, this is the RSO Berlin Radio Symphony Orchestra, and it's exciting. I mean, this is the razzle dazzle, flash and dash performance to end all performances. Everyone loves it for that reason. I think that Argerich is not all just animal high spirits. She knows what she's doing. The sonics, it's live, are not perfect. They're not ideal. There are some balance issues here and there, but it's a thrillingly exciting performance, visceral performance. It hits you in the gut, and more importantly, it survives on disc. Because what happens so often when you have these really exciting performances of things that you hear live or you go and see it, you're like thrilled and it's fabulous, but then on repetition, it becomes more and more uninteresting and more ordinary, because mere technical proficiency, no matter how fast and dazzling it is no substitute for an overall conception of the entire work or large sections or movements of the work. And that she has that here. I mean, who are we kidding? I mean, she's a brilliant musician, and it's one of the thrilling performances of the work. It does offer a combination of pure virtuosity and intelligent shaping, and that's also thanks to Chailly, who's a very fine accompanist. So that's definitely worth hearing. It's one of the great ones, and so is Earl Wild. Earl Wild with Jascha Horenstein. Oh wow, this is just terrific. Oh my goodness, these are exciting performances, especially the finale. It has cuts, it does, but I don't care. It sounds absolutely effortless. Wild, if you read his biography, he was very, he was emphatic about, being relaxed at the piano and not straining for effect. And, his virtuosity was transcendental, truly. I mean, it was second to none. But he always sounded comfortable, as if the music was being spontaneously created while it was being played. And you have that in this performance. And Horenstein, who I think was a dreadful conductor, as often as not, really was 100% behind him in this collaboration. They got along, and they did beautiful work together. I think because Horenstein, at this stage in his career particularly, was not a sentimentalist. He tended to just pick a tempo and stick with it the whole way. But that gave Wild a chance to really strut his stuff in the more romantic episodes, and Horenstein was willing to give him that leash. And so between the two of them, again, it was like Plednev and Rostropovich. There's an interesting chemistry at work, one that actually suits the work very well, because the work itself has this duality. It's this very symphonic piece on the one hand, and it's a virtuoso concerto on the other hand. And the two can go together in interesting ways, and they certainly do here. This is the Chesky release, but now the cycle's on Chandos, but it's readily available, and it's totally awesome. Now here's what I don't have the disc sitting in front of me. It's sitting somewhere. I couldn't find it. So I have the cover. It's Marc-Andre Amelin with the London Phil and Vladimir Yurovsky conducting. Oh my goodness, it's wonderful. It's coupled with the Mettner Second Piano Concerto, which is also fabulous. It's wonderful to give the Mettner some play. Mettner couples very well with Rachmaninoff. I mean, people call him Rachmaninoff without the tunes, which is kind of true. But it's also true that Mettner has his own style and his own way of expressing things, which is harder to break into. But once you do, it's very moving and very beautiful. And so putting these two concertos together, big, beefy symphonic concerti, was a very smart idea. And smart is the name of the game with Amelin, or Hamelin, as they call him now in English. It's so clear that for him, he doesn't have any issues technically. So and his playing doesn't show any sense of strain usually. And because of that, he's able to just shape and structure the music as it comes. He's always a little bit, I think, emotionally a little bit cool on the expressive side. But again, this is music that doesn't need any help in that way. I mean, you don't want to be stoic, but Rachmaninoff's own performance is actually pretty cool expressively. He lets the music make its own points, and so does Handlin. It's a wonderful interpretation. It's on Hyperion. They also have Stephen Huff. So you've got a wonderful selection of Rachmaninoff-ian thingies on Hyperion, actually. But it's a beautiful performance. And because the coupling is so interesting, the Mettner second, the entire disc is something that's really, really worth considering. And that's that's a relevant consideration, by the way, folks. When you're talking about recordings, you're talking about the work, but you're also talking about the whole way in which the work is presented and the context in which it's presented. And this is a rarely excellently thought up context to hear the work, and with one that doesn't get that much play and doesn't suffer from the comparison. So yeah, really, really worth hearing. Definitely worth hearing. Then we've got Byron Janis. Now, Byron Janis was one of those guys who did it more than once. He recorded it for Mercury Living Presence very, very well, extraordinarily well. And this one on RCA with the Boston Symphony and Charles Munch, which has the Boston Symphony and Charles Munch. I mean, the Mercury's no slouch. I think it's the London Symphony and Dorati, isn't it? It's first class. It really is. Whoever's doing it with them, I don't recall at the top of my head. I was just looking at it 5 minutes ago, and I've already forgotten. But, because I wanted to pick one. The reality is either one will do you. They're really wonderful, but I love hearing the Boston Symphony and much of this music. And they're both extremely intelligent, sensitive interpretations that tended to get kind of overlooked in the Rachmaninoff 3 sweepstakes. I'm not sure why, because when a pianist is a great pianist, as Janis was, and he did it twice, I mean, So here it is on RCA Living Stereo, and it's definitely one of the great ones. However, we have to pick one, and it has to be the one. I mean, I have to do it, and you know what this probably is, because I've talked about these performances many times. It's Zoltan Kocis with the San Francisco Symphony and Edo de Vart. These are the performances which are closest in feeling and sensitivity to Rachmaninoff's own, but they have fabulous sound. And again, just that more willingness to stretch the music a little bit when it wants to relax, or push when it needs to push a little bit more. I mean, Kocis' technique at this point was probably better than Rachmaninoff's was on his recording. But these are sterling performances of all the concerti and the Paganini Rhapsody. But the third really did it for me. It has a almost Mendelssohnian lightness, and if you want to think that's a bad thing, it's not. I mean that in the best possible way, in terms of elegance and shape and fluidity. These Rachmaninoff pieces, they're not formally, for all the symphonic interplay between the orchestra and the solo, they're not formally all that, well, sometimes, what's the word? Elegant or inevitable, organic. They tend to be kind of sectional, and all of that comes together here. There's just this fantastic inevitability to the performance. The tempo's perfectly judged. The relationship between the piano and the orchestra really finely balanced. They're just gorgeous performances. And when I want to hear the third concerto more often as not, this is the one I turn to. But any of these that I've talked about will do you well. They're all first-class performances by remarkable artists, and they all what they really do is sort of they treat the music with the respect it deserves. Rachmaninoff is one of those composers who everybody just emotes over. And you should. I mean, the emotion is there. The expressivity is there. It's all there. That's all fair. But what makes it what makes it sustainable over repetition, for years and years and years, is the fact that there's a larger overall structure and point to the music that if you really want to be a connoisseur of it, rather than just someone who, rather than just like, a Beatles fan, rather than someone who just goes to swoon and sweat, which is fine if that's what you want to do. But if you're actually going to collect this work, you want to have performances that give the music the sort of sober intensity that it sustains. I mean, it's there. It's part of the music. It doesn't come out as easily as the virtuoso fireworks, but it still needs to be there. And the great performances have both. They have virtuosity and they have intelligence. And intelligence is a good thing. So there you go, my friends, the Rachmaninoff thirds, all the good ones. Well, most of the good ones. There are others, of course. And you may have some other selections as well. But this list of a dozen of them will really, I think, give you a very, very good sense of the possibilities inherent in the work and how well they can be realized by great artists in combination with fabulous orchestras and conducting. So keep on listening, friends. Thanks for joining me. Take care.